Welcome to Quews.news. In this episode of Politics and Current Affairs, we are talking about Suella Braverman's statement, and this episode is a follow-up on our previous one where we brought this issue to light, and we now want to talk about how it has had an impact on British Pakistanis and Pakistanis around the world, and how this statement by her has been viewed and reacted to. To begin the conversation in my studio, I'd like to introduce our guests. Joining me for the conversation today, we have Mr. Tariq Suleiman. He's an academic working on the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. And we have also been joined by a journalist, Aisha Iqbal. Thank you very much for being with me in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome. And as you know, we've been talking about this particular issue. What do you make of it, and why do you think that the singling out of the Pakistani diaspora was so important to her?
Well, I think firstly, as many of your commentators have said, that it was a very irresponsible statement because it doesn't reflect on the facts and the figures. There is no statistical evidence to demonstrate that Pakistani men are paedophiles. It's a very irresponsible statement to make. What my concern is here is the psychological and the social impact that's going to have on Pakistani men living in this country. Firstly, I mean, we are a deprived minority in this country. We already have issues regarding things such as racism and prejudice. We've had huge problems over the years with Islamophobia. So Pakistani British men are already afflicted with many prejudices. A statement like this is already going to cause, the ripple effect of a statement by the Home Secretary on society is pretty huge, and the ramifications of that and how much that's going to be reflected in the media over the ongoing months and years, it's going to become imprinted on the minds of the people. And therefore, Pakistani men have now got another attack upon them. More prejudice upon them and greater stereotypes on them, and that might not leave them for years to come because it's a very big statement. Paedophilia is one of the worst possible crimes that you can be accused of, and then to label that to Pakistani men, it's a huge injustice, and it's really important for Pakistani men and the Pakistani community to not just take this lying down, but to stand up and to vocalize and to speak for their rights and to discover the facts and to prove her wrong.
Well, Mr. Tariq, I'd like to mention Baroness Warsi has taken this issue quite seriously, and she has raised the issue within the Conservative Party. She's actually gone so far as to say that Suella Braverman is not fit for office because her statement is pointedly racist and bigoted. And there are many in the Conservative Party who share that view. And still, we haven't really seen any backlash coming from within the party, or we've also seen the Prime Minister basically protecting her or not making any statement on this particular issue. Why do you think that is?
See, it's quite interesting that if we see that the way that statement has been framed, that tells us a lot as well. Because just brushing it aside as an irresponsible statement, I think is a responsible way of dealing with that. Because if we see that that statement was framed within that overall debate which was going on, that being politically correct, being not politically correct, and going beyond these things. And it was a well thought out statement to frame within that, which I see that Conservative Party seems to be inherently racist in its institutions. And that we see it, that if you must have seen that Andrew Edwards recently made a statement against black people, and he's been suspended until investigation takes place.
Indeed.
But when it comes to Suella Braverman, I mean, there's no such effect coming from Rishi Sunak. So what we see is that she already had cleared that statement from the Prime Minister before she came in public and gave that statement. So I think that it's the party which had that space for racism already inherently institutionally within that, which just came open and provided that statement. So we need to see that statement within that frame.
Absolutely. And Aisha, in your opinion as a social commentator, how do you think this statement will impact not just the British Pakistanis, but society overall? It's a very divisive statement to make, and again, it can't really lead to any good. So why was it done in the first place?
I think on a longer term impact, just beyond the Pakistani community, on the wider mainstream community, they are being fed the stereotype now, and this is going to be prevalent in the media, and the stigma is going to be in their minds for many years. So there's going to be a big impact on British Pakistani men in various professions, because they work in so many professions where they are working with children in very professional positions. So there's always going to be a subconscious bias that is existing. As to why this statement was made, that's something yet to be uncovered, I believe. I think there needs to be further investigations into this to discover why would Braverman even come out with a statement like this. It does definitely seem to be another agenda behind it. Of course, I mean, politicians don't just come out with statements spontaneously. They are pre-planned, they are thought out, they are, very well executed prior to delivery. So it's definitely something that has another agenda to it, I believe.
What do you think the Pakistani community can do to assuage or alleviate the damage that has already been inflicted by this statement on them? Do you think it's going to impact them in a negative way? And what can be done, really?
Of course it's going to impact them in a negative way, because obviously the Home Secretary has made the statement, this is being splashed all over the news, people's psyches are being impacted. I think a show like this is fantastic, that you're speaking to so many Pakistanis who are able to vocalise their views and points of views. I think it's really important for them to keep speaking out, to question Parliament, to question government, to question why the Home Secretary was allowed to do this, to not sit down and take it lying down, but to speak up and to keep fighting and to prove her wrong, to prove the fact that, paedophiles are not just from a Pakistani community. Yes, there has been issues with regards to child grooming in certain parts of the country where, Pakistan, in the north, where there are many Pakistani men, etc. Of course, but paedophilia is a national issue. It's a human issue. It's not, it occurs across society in
cultures, ethnicities, all over the world.
And I think that also it's really important to not just be spouting views and thoughts, but really to try and get to the hard facts to disprove her, because facts are evidence. So you need to find the facts to prove her argument is actually severely and seriously flawed.
Because the data absolutely does not support her statement at all. Tariq Saab, I'd like to touch upon a very sensitive issue over here, because everybody knows what's happening in India. We have seen the Muslim community of India being targeted under this present dispensation, and there is that agenda of Hindutva that we're seeing, which is a fanatical terrorist sort of organization within the Indian sort of milieu. Do you think there's an attempt to export that mentality, that Hindutva ideology to the UK? It seems like that.
Again, that's another frame one can look at it, because being a British Pakistani and coming these statements from the people in the government, in Conservative Party, who have South Asian background, and one wonders that is that the extension of that Hindutva ideology being pitched against Pakistani Muslims. Now, these are all different way of, if Rishi Sunak doesn't address that, as Jeremy Corbyn before was bogged down into the anti-Semitic discourse within its party's institutional crevices, he's going to have the same trouble. One, that particular racism, and another is that coming from South Asian background, the people who understand that criminality does not have a DNA, it does not have an ethnic DNA at least. You find criminals in every part of society. Highlighting British Pakistani in that context does insinuate towards the Hindutva extension of that Hindutva ideology within the British politics.
And what impact do you think that will have overall on UK society? Because we want to see a tolerant UK, a very diverse UK, and within the Conservative Party, they say it's the most diverse cabinet ever, and yet you have people who themselves are from ethnic minorities trying to target others. How evil is this agenda?
See, that's why I said that it seems as if it's a Hindutva extension coming into playing the subcontinent conflict within the British. The highlight of British value is tolerance, that difference. We not only celebrate difference, we live with that, and we are proud of living with that multicultural context of that difference. But here comes a government which out of nowhere just highlights particular issue on ethnic grounds. That's why I said that it doesn't seem like an irresponsible statement just spontaneously coming from a politician's mouth. It seems quite well thought out, and its implication seems to be devastating. They are going to be horrendous for this society. Absolutely
agreed with that. Aisha, in your opinion, what can the Pakistani community do to remove such stigmas from them? What is it that we need to do as introspection in terms of why we were why was Suella able to pick on Pakistani community in such a way? There should be some way of maybe looking at that as well. And do you have any comment on that as a social observer?
Yeah, I think that Pakistanis can come together, they can form associations, they can form bodies, they can form groups. They can also form, their own body where they start to interact and engage with journalists and reporters. So they have greater dialogue with the media to show that it's not acceptable for them to be presented this way, and it's not acceptable for journalists to just take the side of a statement by the Home Secretary that is prejudiced, and then to just broadcast that on the media without any questioning and without any fair representation of the Pakistani community. So I think there needs to be a lot more engagement and interaction and proactive activity by Muslims and Pakistanis in forming their own associations, their own groups, and working towards alleviating and working towards really stopping these things from from happening again.
Well, we've also been joined on the line by Dr. Kamila Heather, a forensic psychiatrist. Let's get her views on this issue. Now,
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. And you have also been aware of Suella Braverman's statements regarding the grooming gangs and how Pakistani men are mainly involved in that. What do you make of this statement, and why do you think she singled out Pakistani men?
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for inviting me on your talk today, on your talk show today. And I'm, as you have already said, given a very kind introduction about myself. I work in forensic psychiatry as an associate specialist, and I have been working in this capacity for last 15 to 16 years. And worked in a lot of forensic units, and have seen patients in prison as well. And this was my bread and butter of my job. I'm also the executive member of British Pakistani Psychiatry Association, executive members of the Royal College of Psychiatrists and Trent Division, and recently I've been elected as a social secretary of the Association of Pakistani Physicians of Northern Europe.
That is
so
fantastic.
I did hear. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I have heard about all this, that has been going on social media for a while about Ms. Braverman's statement that she has very boldly and very bravely she has done on social media about grooming gangs and stereotyped British Pakistani men in that. Now, this is a very immature statement, I would say, because working with sex offenders and pedophiles and, prisoners, I have seen these patients and who have got the psychopathology of dissocial personalities, and I have worked with them very closely. Now, there is not one factor that describes these grooming gangs. There's a lot of information that goes into it. And I think there is a lot of work being done and research being done about this grooming. Of course, this is a problem in our society, and it's a very big problem, and it has to be tackled because there is no other way that we cannot brush this under the carpet or have a blind eye towards it. It's a very important thing that our children should be protected. And usually this happens within the households. And usually children know these men who are actually grooming them or sexually abusing them. And to give this blame to a one particular society, I think it's a very immature thing to do. And it's a very ignorant thing to do. I don't think she has the whole information background that how much these men, whichever ethnicity they belong to, what is their pathology behind them, what is their childhood predisposition, what is the circumstances of these men. I think she hasn't researched at all about this. And it's very important that you understand the psychopathology of these problems and stereotype one particular ethnicity on this. I would think that not only British Pakistani men, but if we start naming any ethnicity, black or Asian, a British white, for example, like any ethnicity, if you stereotype them, I think it will be very immature and it will be a wrong statement to say because we cannot put one particular culture or ethnicity in this. We can't blame them and shame them like that.
And being a doctor, you work with the data that's available to you, and in your profession, what kinds of people have you come across? From what kinds of ethnicities? Is there a specific group that you deal with, or is it across the board, all kinds of people? And it's mainly a problem with men rather than any particular kind of man.
So, as I said, that to blame one particular ethnicity, that's very immature to say. I would not agree with this at all because since I've worked with these kind of group of people, I have seen that it is across the country, across the nationwide, or even across the world. You will find in every culture, in every ethnicity, in every religion, you will be finding these kind of people, and you have to tackle them like. Our prime minister had said that we have to tackle them with more sanctions, maybe more punishments, giving them a tight scrutinizing around these people. That is going to tackle the situation. To blame it on one particular ethnicity, British Pakistani men, I think that is a completely out of blue statement that she's given. I don't think she's got any background about it. That how much work we put in to any one patient, any one prisoner that comes to us. So there is a whole lot of work that we need to do. We need to do their psychology, psychotherapy, medication, their social circumstances, how to rehabilitate them to go back to this community. There is a lot of work that is supposed to be done with these kind of men, and I don't think they belong to just one particular ethnicity at all. I think that is a very immature statement to say.
And in your opinion, how damaging is this sort of a narrative to the cause itself? Obviously, this issue needs to be dealt with, and there are people from all walks of life that are indulging in such criminal behavior. How damaging is it to just point out one ethnicity and overlooking all the others?
That's a very good question, and I would say that to target just one particular ethnicity, British Pakistani men, I think that is going to be very damaging because these men are Pakistani origin men. They work in NHS, they work in businesses, children are studying in schools, teenagers, they're studying in universities. If you start stereotyping them and people will point out fingers at them, I think it's going to be very detrimental to the society. And the British Pakistani men actually form a very crucial part of the society. And it's not only that they have just come, and some of them are first generation, some are second, even third generation are here. And all of them, if we start stereotyping one particular ethnicity in this, people are going to target them, and all the good work that has gone in, I think you just kind of try to brush it under the carpet or stigmatize it. I think that is a really a bad thing to do with this particular type of group.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kamila Heather, for taking out the time and sharing your views with Quews.news. And hopefully we'll be in touch with you on other issues as well. And once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're continuing a conversation on the Suella Braverman statements. Joining me for the conversation in the studio, we have Mr. Tariq Suleiman and Aisha Iqbal. Thank you very much for joining me. So Aisha, continuing our conversation, do you think the Pakistani community has lacked the support from other members of the British diaspora, let's say other politicians within the Conservative Party, for example, Pakistani politicians for that matter, have not really come up or come out in defense of the community, and also in pointing out the evil intent in singling out the Pakistani community?
I think it's shocking that we haven't heard from anyone in the political scene to actually, rebuke what has been said. Where, we have Sadiq Khan, who is Pakistani in origin. We have Sajid Nawaz, who, has been in politics. Not one person, apart from Baroness Wati, has spoken out about this issue. So that is, that just suggests that despite them knowing that this isn't a good statement to have been made, and despite them knowing that what this will do to Pakistanis, they've just been silent on it. And this is very typical of politicians, unfortunately. In terms of the wider community also, of course, Pakistanis are now, where they get the opportunity to, they are expressing their frustration. But why are we not having any other feedback from from others beyond the Pakistani community to show, to reflect the fact that what has been said is hugely unjust and hugely unfair? But I think it's really just, human nature. Politicians are saying things, people are busy with their lives and they can't be bothered. And also it's about Pakistanis and it's about another minority group. So it doesn't hold the same impact for a lot of people because that unconscious bias still exists in many people's minds. And although there's been a lot of, there's a lot of changes in society today, there's a lot of moves towards equality of all the races, there still is and still exists and will exist for a long time an underlying unconscious bias towards the Pakistani community. Even if a huge injustice, is delivered to them, it doesn't have the same impact as it would with other races.
Yes, we have had some individuals from the Conservative Party, but most of them have remained anonymous. They've said that the dog whistling that Suella Braverman is indulging in, trying to pinpoint just one particular ethnicity, is definitely not the right way to go about it. And it's also damaging the Conservative Party themselves, taking such a stance. What do you think about that?
Yes. Especially there's a very vibrant Conservative Friends of Pakistan within the Conservative Party. And right now, I guess if Prime Minister does not solve this issue out quicker, and he doesn't seem to be in any hurry at the moment, it is going to damage that Conservative Party, and it's even to the extent that it might make it unelectable among the other ethnic groups which have been very recently been attracted to that Conservative Party.
Tariq Sahib, I'd also like to ask you about the contributions that the Pakistani community has made to British society. We have Pakistanis in all walks of life and doing very well, and also being upstanding, law-abiding citizens of Britain. And even so, being singled out in this particular case, what does it really betray in terms of what Suella Braverman is trying to get at?
That's why I'm saying that it does not seem to be some slip of the tongue, or it's not something which is just blurted out in any conversation. It seemed a very well thought out statement, because especially if we look at it, very recently there have been quite a number of white men convicted of these things, are alleged, and they've been even given bail. And we have since these Pakistani men, there have been other crimes committed by other communities, but they have not been raised in that sense as Pakistani British men have been singled out in that whole process. So it does one wonders that where it's coming from. Is she running a Modi's campaign for because he's having a difficulty in he's less likely to win his next election as a landslide as he's been doing up till now. So what's taking place in these two gentlemen's Suella Braverman's mind and her boss Prime Minister's mind? That's anyone's guess.
It's rather unfortunate. Aisha, in your opinion, we've spoken about how the Pakistani community can rally around this particular cause. We've seen a number of professionals from different walks of life raise this issue. But how much more needs to be done, in your opinion? What are the other ways that we can address this particular issue? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that Pakistanis should keep vocalising, should keep speaking out, and should keep highlighting that this is an unjust statement until they get a reaction from the government. I don't think they should just let it lie, because if they do, then statements like that can come out again in the future. It's only when a community stands up for itself that those who are being unjust actually, reconsider or, take a step back from doing something like that again. So I think Pakistanis should keep on voicing their opinion, should keep using the media as well to vocalise their perspective, to be able to highlight also, if they can, to the wider population that this is unjust, this is not true. And if they keep voicing it, then at least there's an alternative voice out there that is constantly combating that negative narrative.
And from a social perspective,
about more of a balance.
Yeah, and from a social perspective, we also know that the data on this particular crime is not sufficient, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done by the authorities themselves in getting the actual, factual and correct data. Why is that not being done? Isn't that the real issue that Suella Braverman and the powers that be should be focusing on?
Yeah, getting the facts, because you need to get to the facts to get to the truth. You need to get to the evidence to get to the truth. We can all sit and we can talk and we can conjecture and we can, come up with our discontent and everything. That's just going to be conversations, and that's important, but we have to get to the evidence and the facts. And that's something that those who have that kind of a mindset should be actually trying to dig for the truth. They should be trying to arrange meetings with those organisations who have the statistics, who have the evidence, so that they can collate that information and come to a statistical final conclusion that what has been put out there isn't reflective of what's happening in society. The statement doesn't make sense, it's illogical, and it's not based on fact. And once they have this evidence, they need to be getting that evidence out there by speaking about it, by engaging with journalists and reporters, by lobbying the government, even perhaps potentially, demonstrations. Having demonstrations on this as an injustice, because it's a huge statement. It's so derogatory. It's defamatory towards a particular racial minority. It's very stigmatizing, and it will have a lot of impact. Have a big impact on them. You are saying that a community of Pakistani men are paedophiles. What worse statement? How much more defamatory can you get in your statement than that? It's grossly unjust.
And speaking of defamation, we spoke about this earlier as well. What recourse to the law does the Pakistani community as a whole have? Can they approach any court of justice and say that this defamation or libel is taking place against a particular community and it has far-reaching repercussions for British society themselves?
I don't have a legal background in that sense that I can comment on that, but we have a precedence, and we can learn from the things which has taken place before us. As I mentioned earlier on, that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was questioned on this particular issue, that under his leadership Labour Party was anti-Semitic institutionally, and it was very difficult to separate the Zionism from the Jew element, and though it was at times not very fair on Jeremy Corbyn, but still that made it very, very difficult, and it was a sticky issue. What we require right now is that we need to unite to start with. And we need to take up, as I said, Conservative Friends of Pakistan is a very vibrant community within Conservative Party. Even if they take it up, and rest of the Pakistani British community, they take these issues up, that will have a huge impact. And they should not rest until we get to the bottom of at least what has transpired to that statement. And legal discourse is also part of that. It should become multi-pronged strategy.
Interestingly, this is not the only statement that has caused problems for Suella Braverman. She also spoke about migrants crossing over, invading England in boats, who are fleeing war and persecution. So that statement also, it shows her state of mind. What do you think about that?
Well, that statement that she made caused a lot of outcry amongst society, because it was just so shocking, because it was a very unjust statement. It didn't take on board the fact that so many immigrants who come from so many of these countries are coming from appalling circumstances, from war-torn nations. They're in very desperate situations. Their plight is extremely desperate, and these factors were not taken. So her statements often tend to be quite crude and quite harsh. And they're not reflective of any other perspective apart from how she's feeling, and so they can come across very ruthless. And I just think that hits very hard on a lot of people, and that's why her statements are just causing this kind of a lashback. She needs to, that might be her approach, and maybe that's just the way that she wants to do it, but delivering statements like that it's not having a good impact socially. She
further went on to say, and you can also please lean in on this, that Pakistani British men are incompatible with Britain's culture and the way they look at women in a demeaning and illegitimate way. How do you view this particular statement?
What is that based on? If you're going to make a statement, you cannot make a statement and you cannot say something without having any evidence for it. And that's something I'm very strong and passionate about. If you're going to make that statement, how can you make that? What is that? Is that her thought process? Is that things that she's been reading or people have been telling her, or her personal experience? Even if it is, that doesn't reflect the whole of Pakistani men or in this country. But it needs to be based on fact. How can you say that Asian men are not, or Pakistani men are not compatible? There are so many different types of Pakistani men. I know many Pakistani men who are not compatible with the Asian culture. They have actually moved away from the Asian culture, and they're very immersed in the English culture. And there are those who have taken the middle ground. And I don't read, and most Pakistani men that I know, they're hardworking family people who are contributing to their families and contributing to society in a very positive and productive way. So I don't read, unless she comes out with some actual factual evidence. I think the basis of her claims don't stand on any strong grounds.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because as far as the facts are concerned, the Home Department's own internal investigation in 2020 pointed out to the fact that most of these grooming gang members were white men under the age of 30. How could she just throw that completely under the carpet and not even mention that when it's a report from her own department?
See, that makes one wonder that Foreign Office immediately put out a statement saying that about her earlier statements about the immigrants invading Britain, that there is no evidence to the effect of the statement she made. But when it came to this statement, we seen that the government seems to be backing her, and the government seems to be quiet on that issue. And she had cleared that issue from her boss before putting that out. So that is a bit worrying. It's not what she does. If she has been doing all these before, and before that Foreign Office came out and they very categorically denied that there was any evidence to the effect what she had said. But now it seems that the government is quiet, and there has to be some explanation for that quietness.
Can I just say also that I often deliver PR training workshops to my clients, and I think it's important. As well as voicing one's opinion on whatever platforms one can do, that's important. But I think the Pakistani community should form an organisation or a body where they are engaging with the media on a regular basis. So when a statement comes out, they should not stop at that. They should be a society that combats negative statements that are coming out about their community. And that can start happening by the Pakistani community, members of the Pakistani community, sending out press releases, sending out pictures on a regular basis, and also networking and connecting with journalists and reporters so that they have the contacts there, that they can get another voice and another opinion when something like that comes out, so they can actually speak. And the Pakistani community needs to really be connecting with them and letting them know that they are not going to stand for these statements, and put pressure on them for a balanced representation of themselves in the media when statements or injustice towards them becomes a news story.
I think that's a very important suggestion that you've made, and I hope that the community comes together and really does what you're talking about.
Because if you do have that, if you do have a body and a statement comes out and that association says, what, the Pakistani community does not accept what has been said, and these press releases go out to the media, they're then getting feedback from the Pakistani community. Otherwise, they might not be hearing these voices of discontent. And
unfortunately, if you really look at what's happening here, on one level, you also have to see what's happening back in India. This entire Hindutva plan, it's a program. It's very reminiscent of what was happening in Hitler's Germany. Unfortunately, but that needs to be said, and we're seeing a reflection of that in the statement of Suella Braverman, and bringing that, rather importing it to Britain. How dangerous is that?
That's why I said that it seems as if her statement reflects what RSS and Modi's Hindutva is having all those different worldview about Muslims living in South Asia, and that reflection coming from a British government and its minister is a lot more than just worrying.
We also have to look at it in another perspective, because you would not hear such a statement being made by a Pakistani against an Indian, or for that matter, any other ethnicity or community. Pakistanis pride themselves as being very friendly people, and throughout history over this past 75 years, Pakistan has been used as or rather demonized as something to garner votes in every successive Indian election. It kind of reminds me of a jilted ex-lover who's still hung up on their ex, and that's the kind of situation that we're confronted with. How do you deal with that?
See, that's why so far my experience in Britain has been that we have great friendships across the border. Here in UK, we have Hindu friends. We don't even know the religion of lots of South Asian friends which we intermingle with, and that is being actually put in question right now with that statement coming that the discourse which we have of insecurity within that South Asian culture, the South Asian politics which has been brought by RSS, that kind of culture is being promoted here now by the South Asian background, the ministers of South Asian background, at least not coming from them would have been much better coming from anyone else. We could, instead of them taking a stand on that, instead of them, all these people, even Prime Minister, standing up and saying that no, in this country we will not tolerate such culture, such divisive politics, or even divisive views on these ethnic grounds.
And don't you think it's almost a direct attack on the secular values of Britain?
At the moment in Britain, there's so much about racial equality. It's actually very shocking that at a time when there is so much emphasis on treating everyone with, in society, there's so much promotion and
of diversity.
For then suddenly such a comment, which is actually quite racist, because you are stigmatizing a particular.
It's racist and it's bigoted.
It's racist and it's bigoted and it's unjust and it's unfair. So it's going against all this whole drive to be inclusive, that everyone is equal, that we shouldn't be judging people on their race, and even to the point where there's so much more about inclusion nowadays. So it's quite shocking, especially in this current environment.
Yeah, unfortunate that we're seeing this happen, but British society themselves also need to take stock of this situation and try to prevent such statements from being made or promoted in the media, we haven't seen much support from other cultures, or let's say even the white majority of Britain.
I think often what happens is because of the media, people in their daily lives are very busy, and then people have been fed this information for a long time about these grooming gangs. I don't think the general public really digs deep into these things. They read a story and they often just take it to be fact, and so and if they've been hearing it for a long time, they're just not going to really question it. It's just it's human nature, but it is down to those individuals who are being impacted by it. They're the ones who are going to have the passion and the drive to speak up and do something about it. Those who are not being impacted by it, sadly, due to the nature of human nature, it's just not. They're not going to be particularly bothered.
Yeah, we're lucky enough to have certain individuals joining us on the line to talk about this particular issue as well. So we've been joined on the line by a very senior journalist from York, Mr. Shahid Sadullah. Let's listen to his views as well. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you.
Shahid Saab, I'd like to talk to you about the Suella Braverman issue. It's been blown up out of proportion. Her statements regarding Pakistani men involved in grooming gangs has not gone down well, obviously, with the Pakistani community, and there's a lot of flack that she is facing on this issue. What do you make of this particular issue, sir?
Well, I think it's very disappointing to hear this sort of statement, although it's not altogether surprising, I would say. It comes on the back of 2 or 3 other statements by Ms. Braverman, which are more or less sort of the same ilk. She mentioned about an invasion by migrants coming in small boats. There was this statement about involvement of Pakistanis in child grooming gangs. Then, very recently, a lot of newspapers have reported her as being quite profoundly displeased at with the Essex police for having raided a pub which had gollywogs. And she has given a rather terse statement, quoted again in the press, which said that they should be rather doing better things and tackling more serious crime. So it comes at the back of a lot of stuff which I think paints Mrs. Braverman's political views, and they're very much to the right of centre, which is where I think much of the Tory party sits these days. And therefore, I think there is an attempt here very much to consolidate that section of a political base. Also, I would say that, for decades, I don't know how long you've been watching British politics, but, I've been here for the better part of 5 decades. And it is almost, a fact of nature, so to say, that whenever an election approaches, the issue of race, migration, which are sort of 2 sides of the same coin, they start coming up to the fore. So one of the things that you can take from this is that you can bet that an election is not all that far away. And if you put all of that together, it shows that, this sort of thing from the extreme right of the Tory party is always disappointing, but is never entirely surprising. I think to add to this, you have to say that when this issue of child grooming gangs who were sort of preying on very young adults, minors, and then exploiting them for sexual purposes, when this originally came up, there were the sort of 3 or 4 cases that made the press in a big way. They happened in Rochdale and Rotherham, in Newcastle, and I believe there was a case in Telford as well. And in some of these cases, there was a preponderance of the Asian community. So I think it was sometimes shortly after 2012 when there was an independent review of the Rotherham case, which concluded that the majority of the known perpetrators were of Pakistani origin. I think it was then that the then Labour Minister, Miss Sarah Chapman, and she was a shadow minister actually, there wasn't a Labour government, she was the Minister for I think, women and equality or something. And she also said something to the effect that the grooming gangs were made up predominantly of men of Pakistani origin. I think all this was sort of the perception was cemented, unfortunately, by a Quillam report. There was a Quillam Foundation in those days. It doesn't exist anymore, I'm told, but in those days it was very much there, and the report was prepared and made by people of South Asian origin, and it found that from 2005 to the time that this report came out, which was, as I said, around 2012 or thereabouts, it found that out of 264 cases, 222 involved people of South Asian origin. Now, of course, South Asian origin doesn't mean Pakistani only. It can mean Bangladesh, it can mean Afghans, it can mean Indians, it can mean a lot of other people. But it was this sort of thing that sort of got this image into people's minds. And of course, this was led by the right wing media. And everybody got the image that, oh, the Pakistani men are the males who are responsible for this. Now, this went on for some time, till about, say, in 2016 or thereabouts. People said that, well, let's go deeper into this and see how much truth there is in this. And in 2016, I think, there was a report which was based on figures from the Crown Prosecution Service, which found that out of 6,200 defendants in cases of child abuse, the number of Asians was only 4%. And there was another report, of course, which went, this sort of sat well with another report, which was much earlier, which said that among, I think, I don't know the exact number of people who were convicted, but among people who have been convicted, 85% were white, and again, only 4% were Asians. What has happened since 2022 is, and even probably a bit earlier than that, is that police forces, I think, gradually are not now mentioning the ethnic origin of people who are involved in these cases. Mind you, when I say these cases again, there's a huge number of activities which are involved here. There's, things like child abuse and sex with a minor, grooming gangs, and so on. And different forces classify them in different ways. For example, with some forces, if a person was guilty of raping, say, a 15-year-old child, that would not show in the cases for child abuse, it would show in the cases for rape. And because of that and the extreme amount of confusion involved, in 2022, a report said that most police forces were not now recording the ethnic minority of people involved in such cases, and therefore it was impossible to come out and say that any particular community is overrepresented in the crime figures of this particular crime. Therefore, what one can really say is that Ms. Braverman's statement is not really based on any facts or any statistics as such. It is based on perception. And most racial states are based on perception, I would say. And it is unfortunate that she should have come out with something like that. What is even more unfortunate, I think, is that the Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, has decided that no action seems to be necessary on this. And there again, I think he's playing to the right wing Tory base, which is a very big base now in this Tory party. So, altogether, it is very disappointing. It's not something which is at all backed by any sort of statistic, and it's just based on a perception. It should not have been made, such a statement, because it focuses attention on a community which is already deprived, which is already facing a lot of unfair criticism, and this only adds to it. It adds to I think, the feeling of vulnerability that many people in the British Pakistani community face, and it would make it all the more probable that they should be open to criticism, anger, and perhaps even physical harm from extreme right wing groups in the country. So, to that extent, it is extremely unfair. And one would have thought that a person in a position as hugely responsible as that of the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom would have considered these factors before making such a statement.
Well, do you think that this statement itself betrays a more sinister agenda? And if you also go back to the statements made by Baroness Warsi and some other members of the Conservative Party, they have pointed out that the attitude and the statement itself is extremely bigoted and racist, and therefore the individual making these statements, in this case Suella Braverman, is not fit for the office that she holds. What would you say about that?
Well, I think, yes, that is a statement that Mr. Sunak certainly should take into account. The sad part of it is, I think, the sad part of it is that the middle of the road Tories, which people like Baroness Warsi typify, the old school Tories, perhaps now are not in a majority in this party. And much of the party, and especially the grassroots support of this party, seems to be based on more right wing views. And I think this has come about since Brexit, because a lot of people from the Brexit Party and other right wing organizations that were supporting Brexit went into the Tory party. And I think one of the main reasons why David Cameron decided to have a referendum on Brexit was to stop his party from splitting up. Because he felt that if he didn't, a lot of the right wing elements of the party would go and join the Brexit party. So I think Sunak has to pander to that section, which is unfortunate. Which is unfortunate for the political development of this country, and is particularly unfortunate for people of color. But that's the way it is, I'm afraid.
And sir, do you think that the larger agenda that is being pursued in India against Muslims in particular, and the overall attitude of India towards Pakistan also has something to play in this statement being made?
Well, I don't think one can rule it out because, I mean, as far as Ms. Braverman is concerned, I mean, I've not gone into this deeply, but I think her family was somewhere in Africa or Madagascar or somewhere, and they came from there, although I'm told that they are also of South Asian origin. But if that is happening, and I personally, one can only make a guess at this, but if that is happening, it would be extremely, extremely unfortunate because, the politics of India and Pakistan sometimes reduces itself to a zero-sum game, and to import that into the UK with its large number of people of Pakistani heritage and of Indian heritage, and to bring that sort of politics of mutual confrontation, to import it into the UK, would be the last thing that any responsible politician should be doing.
Thank you very much, Shahid Sadullah Saab, senior journalist, for taking out the time and sharing your views with Quews.news. And we will be in touch with you on other issues as well. But once again, thank you for your views. And now we've been joined on the line by Dr. Shahid Latif. He's the president of the British Psychiatrists Association. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Shahid, as you well know about the brouhaha that has taken place as a result of Suella Braverman's statement singling out Pakistani men involved in grooming gangs and making it a very political and divisive issue. Please share your thoughts on that with us.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. A very, very pertinent topic at the moment. Well, we know for a fact, and I think, first of all, it's always good to start with a premise about this menace in our society in relation to child sexual exploitation and grooming. We need to be out there and shun and and challenge and support any kind of initiative that challenges these evils in our society. So that's the premise I wanted to start off with. In relation to the Home Secretary's statement, we can understand, and it's good to see that the government wants to do some work. However, the narrative and the rhetoric which the government, the direction they've gone, is absolutely wrong. It is unacceptable, because what they've actually done is, let alone focusing on some of their shortcomings over the last 11, 12 years of governance, of withdrawing funds from these very evils and not focusing on these. They have now suddenly decided, just before the elections, to focus on this, but not just focus, but also to scapegoat a certain community. Now, I think it's important to state that nobody denies the fact that we have these evils within certain societies. Who doesn't? Where does it not exist? However, to single out British Pakistanis is completely wrong. It's unacceptable, and there is a rhetoric of racism and scapegoating here, and that's the reason why I took it, or we took it upon ourselves as an organization, to take the lead and get a number of healthcare organizations. I'm part of a number of national conglomerations where there are a number of ethnic minority healthcare groups, almost about, I think, 60 or 70, through WhatsApp and emails and websites, etc. And they're from different backgrounds. They're just not Pakistani or Muslims. We've got Indian, we've got Egyptian, we've got Cameroonian, we've got Ghanaian, African, Arab, Bangladeshi, Afghani, Sri Lankan. So we managed, when we spoke to them and said this is what's happening, they said this is absolutely unacceptable. And it's British Pakistanis today. Tomorrow it will be another group. So we agreed to formulate a letter, which we did, and we put that together. And we have signatories of almost about 44 different organizations. And because of the timing, we had to get it out. We're still getting requests from other organizations to put their names on that letter. So that's where we are with this, and we just want to push. And what we are asking for is an apology, and a withdrawal of this statement, an explanation, despite the fact that a Home Office report in 2020 suggested that there is no specific group which comes out, though there are certain pockets, but there's no specific groups overall nationally that stick out like a sore thumb. So I don't know why the Home Secretary decided to name out British Pakistanis. In fact, what the report did say, the Home Office, her own office's report, was that if it was anything that did stick out percentage-wise, it was white males, which did stick out. But we don't say that. We should not be focusing on groups or gender or ethnicity, etc. We need to look at this menace as a menace in society, and we need to challenge it. And we're looking at not only an explanation, but also engagement, because we're more than happy as organizations to help and support the government. So they have to put their money where their mouths are, and basically we need to, they need to engage. It wasn't long ago that the whole prevent strategy came out, and they were looking at focusing on certain group, and the white elephant in the room was Muslims. I at that time, even then, became part of a strategy which challenged some of the rhetoric that was coming out. And I said, rather than focusing on Muslims or not saying it, you have to go out and you have to engage. You have to gain trust. So the only thing that's going to come out of this is division. The only thing that's going to come out of this is mistrust, and that's going to grow.
And do you think that the statement also betrays a sort of deflection from the government departments themselves for skirting the issue or turning a blind eye to it? Don't you think they have some responsibility themselves, and they should look into their own departments and see where they have shortcomings and address those?
Absolutely. Why don't they answer the question why they withdrew funds to focus on this particular issue? I think that's something that we really need to ask the government. It's good that they're taking it. The question isn't why they're doing it now. They should be doing it. It's never too late. But I think one of the things that they should be doing is very much what you've just said as to why they had pulled funds and why wasn't this taken on earlier. This is not something that's just come out of the blue last year. It's been here for at least over a decade, and the government knew about it, and they've decided. And I just wonder, with the elections looming around the corner, this is just political scapegoating and point scoring, and also maybe getting the right wing on their side and looking for votes, which is a worry because, as some of the other prominent leaders have said, there could only be two things. Either this is scapegoating and incompetence, or this is done on purpose. So I think there's a lot of questions to be answered.
Well, thank you very much. And those are very pertinent questions. And we hope that the government of Rishi Sunak does decide to take it up and answer those questions as well. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Shahid Latif, and hopefully we'll be in touch with you on further issues as well. Thank you once again. And now we're being joined on the line by Dr. Naveed Saeed. He's the chairman of the Muslim Doctors and Dentists Association of the UK. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Naveed, you may have heard of the issue, which is Suella Braverman's comments regarding grooming gangs and Pakistani men being involved in them predominantly. What do you make of her statement? How do you view it?
I think the statement is very unfortunate. I think it's very misplaced. And as a Pakistani Muslim doctor, I feel quite aggrieved by it. But one of the main things is, as doctors, as physicians, as Muslims, we try to practice evidence-based sort of living. Certainly, that's the core of what we do. And all the research that has been published, even the Home Office's own research, as well as lots of other academic papers, have thoroughly debunked this myth. So it's extremely unfortunate that somebody in such a high office makes such a reckless statement.
And do you think that this statement is very damaging for British society itself and not just the Pakistani community?
Yes, I do think so, and I was struck by Baroness Warsi's interview recently she gave last week, where she called this out, that the rhetoric is very divisive, and it does nothing to bring together communities. It does nothing to engender better understanding of communities. If anything, it forces a wedge between different communities, which, especially in today's day and age, where things have been quite sort of polarized, it is a very, very unfortunate and damaging statement. And I don't think that the tone in which it was said really addresses the facts that are quite evident from all the research that we have seen.
And do you think that the statement actually detracts from the real issue, which is the protection of vulnerable children by demonizing one particular ethnicity? Do you think that that's some kind of agenda-driven statement?
Quite possibly. I mean, I'm not an expert in this particular area. I'm an expert in public health. But having discussed with and listened to a lot of experts who deal with this type of thing, all of them have said that this is not a very helpful statement. What we do know is at least 500,000 children here in the UK every year are victims of this type of abuse. And so the real focus should be on developing policies that are very victim-focused and try to bring the perpetrators, whoever they are, from whatever ethnicity, back to book and get them charged and prosecuted with the full force of the law. If people have done these evil and criminal activities, then they should be pursued, absolutely. But like we said before, and many commentators have said, all the evidence points to the fact that there is no overrepresentation of any ethnic group who are involved in this type of evil behavior.
So again, I'll ask you that, do you think it's diverting the attention from the issue of protecting children rather than focusing on just one community?
Well, of course it is, because that's why we're here, you and I, discussing it today, and it has caused a lot of issues for us, for our community, for community cohesion, and it's pushed things back quite significantly. So, of course, there must be some other agenda at play here. I'm not sure what the agenda is. I'm not a politician. I don't look at the focus group reports. What I do know is that we have seen a trend amongst certain politicians to stoke some sort of culture war. And this has traditionally been something which, you know, people from the far right have tried to use as a way of galvanizing their base and causing disharmony within the communities. And for as a son of an immigrant family, you know, what we want to do is to, you know, contribute, you know, what we can to community, to the society, and to be seen as and recognized as, fully contributing members of the wider society. And statements like this do not help professionals and other people within the community to have that level of trust with people in authority. And that is only sort of detrimental. And we've seen the results of that during the pandemic, when people, you know, marginalized people from Black and minority ethnic communities did not engage with the messages that were there put out, the health messages, in order to protect the health of the population, because there's this sense that, you know, the people in authority don't always have our best interests at heart, and this plays into that agenda. So from the community's perspective, it increases the mistrust that we have, and from the politicians' perspective, it divides the issues of social cohesion, and so these things work against each other. And as people, as practitioners on the front line, it makes our job particularly harder. And all the people who are involved in these types of issues and looking after the victims, they have all said that this type of rhetoric has not been particularly helpful.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Naveed Saeed, for taking out the time and sharing your views with Quews.news. So thank you very much, Tariq Saab, for being here, and Aisha for sharing your views with us. Message for our audience is that we'd like to have your feedback and your comments on what you think about our program, and also what further needs to be done. It is a diaspora channel, it is a channel for overseas Pakistanis, and we'd love to hear from you. On that note, it's goodbye.